And welcome to our first BCS Analysis session. As you can see, I'm standing in front of the big BCS board. True, this is not the most expensive high-tech video board there is, but what's unique about this one is that you can actually read the information. As you can see, there are the top 10 teams in the BCS updated last night. We have in red is the poll ranking. That's the combination of the Harris poll and the coaches poll. The two combined together, that's 2/3 of the BCS ranking. So that's the most important element by far in the BCS formula. In green is the computer ranking. That's the average of all the computers put together. It's not one single computer ranking. And that counts as 1/3 of your BCS ranking. So it's important, but it's not nearly as important as media polls. And also, just for fun, I threw in there the NCAA strength of schedule. That's the number on the far column in blue. NCAA, the strength of schedule as a separate component was removed from the BCS formula a number of years ago, but I thought it'd be fun just to take a look at it. And guess what? The easier your strength of schedule, 101st strength of schedule, 72, 117, the easier it is to go undefeated. The one team in the top that stands out in strength of schedule, the way the NCAA measures it, which is just the record of your opponents, is clearly Auburn, is head and shoulders above all the other undefeated teams, and Nebraska and LSU are ahead of the one-loss teams. We're going to break down the BCS here a little bit more than that. The big story last week started out as Auburn getting jumped by Oregon, when in actuality that's not a big story at all, because it doesn't matter who's one versus who's two as long as you're in the top two. Oregon did have a very impressive win at Southern Cal. Oregon certainly looked good in doing so, but Oregon's overall schedule, when you add in all those bad teams, they beat 0-8 New Mexico, 1-8 Washington State, 2-6 Tennessee. So they've got a lot of bad teams mixed into their schedule. So their record of their opponents is poor, but Oregon has definitely beat some very good quality teams. Again, it doesn't matter. And Auburn's schedule the way on out, Alabama, the SEC championship game, they've still got certainly a couple of good teams to play, so their schedule is going to be fortified even more. So if Oregon and Auburn win out, they're in the national title game. Another interesting story that happened this week is the non-automatic qualifiers. TCU, Boise, and Utah, 3 teams from the non-power conferences, all in the top 5 this week, has never happened in the history of the BCS. And TCU jumped over Boise, and you can see why, a couple of reasons. Boise at number 3 in the polls is the highest ranked team only because they started as the highest ranked non-automatic qualifier. TCU has a higher computer ranking, not by a whole lot, and they played a tougher schedule. It turns out, this is kind of hard to believe if I'd said this back in August, but TCU's win over Baylor is a better quality win than Boise's win over Virginia Tech. Remember, Boise beat Virginia Tech 33-30 to open the season. Virginia Tech lost to James Madison the next week. James Madison is struggling just to win games in the CAA, and nobody knows what that is, but that's the Colonial Athletic Association. That quality win over Virginia Tech, not so much. Even though Virginia Tech has rebounded and is now back in the top 25, they're pretty far down the top 25. Meanwhile, TCU beat Baylor by 35 points. Baylor is 7-2 and now in the top 25, ranked ahead of Virginia Tech. And here we go. This weekend, an incredible showdown, maybe the biggest game between non-automatic qualifiers in the history of the BCS. TCU goes to Rice Stadium in Salt Lake City to take on Utah. And here's how you can tell this is a big game. ESPN Game Day is not at an SEC game, they're at a Mountain West game. That means it's big. If TCU wins at Utah with their already quality wins, their strength of schedule, I think TCU can hold off Boise as the highest ranked non-automatic qualifier. The good news for Boise is Hawaii and Nevada, teams that you may not have thought that much of back before the season started, are actually having pretty good years. And so those are some decent teams that may give Boise a little bit of a boost. Utah needs some help. Their schedule is a lot weaker. If they do beat TCU at home, they still don't have the rest of the resume that TCU has. It's going to be harder for Utah to stay ahead of one of these other one-loss teams if Auburn or Oregon happens to slip up. If Auburn or Oregon slips up, though, some of the teams that are looking in, I think Alabama. You notice Alabama's number 5 in the polls, in the human polls. That's helping them tremendously overcome what is surprisingly number 15, a poor computer ranking. That's partially because you look back over Alabama's schedule, the big win over Florida, maybe Florida's not that great. The big win over Penn State, maybe Penn State's not that great. 2-touchdown loss to South Carolina, who then lost to Kentucky. And who has 2 losses. So Alabama's schedule not that impressive so far, but here's the big thing. Alabama has so many big games remaining against number 10 LSU this week and closing the season in the Iron Bowl against Auburn that Alabama can make a great move. And then an SEC title game, even though this year the team that they would face in the SEC title game is probably not going to be a team that's ranked very high. Still, it's at least going to be a decent team to keep the voters on your team in the minds of the voters. The next best chance of a one-loss team getting in there, I think, is Nebraska. With Nebraska's strength of schedule, their quality wins. They beat Missouri, otherwise undefeated. They beat Oklahoma State, who's otherwise undefeated. The inexplicable screw-up against Texas at home looks even weirder now as each week goes by, and Texas isn't even bothering to show up anymore. But the Nebraska, if they went out and then could play Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, they don't play during the regular season, but if they could meet, that could be a signature victory that could bump the winner of that game, especially if it's Nebraska, bump them up in the rankings if, again, Oregon or Auburn should fade. As you get a little bit further down the list, Wisconsin, LSU, they have their chances. LSU's already lost to Auburn, so it doesn't look like they're 2 games behind them. It doesn't look like they have a way of making the SEC championship game, even if they were to upset Alabama. LSU beating Alabama probably knocks out Alabama, but doesn't get LSU there. And then Wisconsin is in a bunch of 3, 4, 5-way ties to win the Big Ten. Ohio State, Michigan State, Iowa, all are in the mix to win the conference. It's going to take a lot of things to happen for Wisconsin to move up. They don't play very many high-ranked teams for the rest of the season, so they're not going to grab anyone's attention. They do have the inside track on winning the Big Ten and going to the Rose Bowl, but I think it's going to be hard for them to get into the national title game. I think the way it plays out, I think Oregon actually has a very good shot at winning out. Auburn has a tough game with Alabama remaining. TCU, if they can win at Utah, they can position themselves to being the highest ranked non-automatic qualifier. Boise just needs to keep chugging along, and Boise better be impressive against Nevada or Hawaii. If they find themselves in a close game, that's going to hurt them in the minds of the voters. Utah, there I got an uphill battle. Strength of schedule, 117th in the country. But if they beat TCU, maybe the voters think that's really impressive, and they will jump up. So that's our look at the BCS standings for this week. Stay tuned this weekend. Alabama, LSU, Utah, TCU are going to have a big impact on the ratings. For next week, we'll see how those turn out.